welcome to this week's episode of the Making It in Asheville podcast. This is your neighborhood podcast to hear the stories of entrepreneurs, small business owners, community leaders, creators of all walks of life here in Asheville. We ask questions to unpack what they are making and learn how they are making it in Asheville. And this week, people, I think that we're in a new territory, perhaps, of guests. So we've had nonprofits on in the past. Is Organic Grower School a nonprofit? Yes, no, maybe so.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So we've had nonprofits, but we've never had anyone like Green Thumb Education that I'm aware of. We've had a butcher shop, might be the closest thing, but not a farm or green or growing or agricultural guest. And I am so excited to have Cameron Farlow on, Executive Director of the Organic Growing School, which is in Asheville at this point, seems to be staple. And I have so many questions. I have so much excitement. I am a novice farmer or grower. And on behalf of all of the folks growing things in North Carolina and Asheville, we are excited to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be the first, I guess, green growing nonprofit on the show. So thanks for having me.
Of course. And so I gave a very high level overview, executive director. I guess there are a couple questions that are perhaps, the easiest first ones. What does that mean? And then what is the Organic Growing School?
Yeah, well, it's the Organic Growers School.
There we go.
Yeah, but I missed the first part of your question.
Okay.
It broke up.
No problem. We're gonna chop this up in a second, so I'm gonna ask it better and in one shot. Okay. Perfect. And so there are some clear and obvious first questions, and those first questions are: can you please tell us a little bit more about Organic Growers School? And what is it to be the executive director?
Big question.
Yes.
So
very, very open-ended, hopefully.
Yeah, I'll start with the first one because I feel like I've been answering that question the longest. So the Organic Grower School, we are a small nonprofit. We like to think of ourselves as small and scrappy. But we've been working in Western North Carolina for 28 years now. And it's our mission to inspire, educate, and support people to farm, garden, and live organically. So that runs, the full gamut of, people who are never growing to people who've been growing for decades and are doing it to support some portion of their livelihood or just to support their families or wanting to incorporate or into their lifestyle too. So, if that's alternative energy or having, chickens in your backyard or just growing a tomato on your back porch, there's so many ways it can happen. And that's what we're trying to help people do, recognize that you can grow and you have sort of that own personal sovereignty around your food and where it comes from to some degree, no matter who you are or where you are or what you're doing. So we are supporting farmers of all levels, and that's one of the audiences we serve. We're also supporting gardeners, as I was saying, so home growers, and then those other folks. And I feel like I'm just repeating.
No, you did great.
Now,
and
but,
so is the distinction then between farmer and gardener some version of livestock, or is it scale? Where do you draw that line?
I would say it's more scale and intention behind your growing. So you can be farming on a quarter of an acre or a small plot of land, but it's really the intention to support your community, I would say. Or if you're, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, you're getting some sort of income off of what you grow. So there's that commercial element, but I also am been thinking more recently about the definition of a farmer too, and I think we want to take into account our indigenous nations too, who are looking more at food sovereignty for their communities, or other organizations or people who are growing for their community too. So that's where I'm trying to shift that definition for myself from just the capitalist, commercial piece of production to producing for your community more so than maybe your family or your neighbors, sort of thing. So that's kind of that line that I would say distinguishes people who are farming from people who are home growers.
Got it. And a part of, I'm looking at the website open on the side here, and a part of it, I'm seeing some little, pigs. And so it's not all just growth of vegetable, fruit, garden variety. It is also livestock and husbandry in some form or another.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah. So I think, having a diversified growing or being a diverse grower is something that's really important for a healthy natural ecosystem as well. And that's sort of mimicked from nature. And that's what we think about a lot with sustainable agriculture too, is trying to keep those systems and ecosystems healthy. And a lot of times livestock or animals are involved in that, whether or not the livestock are being grown for meat or food. There's still, you have your little microorganisms and the bugs that are also doing lots of good, important work in the soil too. So, and bees and other livestock too. So it runs that full gamut for sure. And I should back up and say, so we're the main way that we're doing this is through education. So we offer workshops and trainings and conferences throughout the year to the different audiences that we're trying to support as well. And so that's really our lifeblood, is education. And we do that in lots of different ways.
Perfect. And I have, there are a lot of threads that I want to pull on what you've said so far. I also want to say, so executive director, and I do believe you took that role coming up on a year now. We said that in the pre-episode. So, executive director, we're going to run down this rabbit hole at some point as well. At a high level, what does your day-to-day look like? What are you charged with in that role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm still figuring it out. And I think maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but when we we did a whole leadership restructuring last year when I stepped into the executive director role. So we've been creating what this new sort of picture of what the ED is for Organic Grower School since then. So, I've been figuring it out a lot, and I still am. The boring answer is it's a lot of computer work. We work remotely, and my team is remote. So, and with the pandemic, all of our education is online. So it's just a lot of like Zoom meetings and Google Drive and emails and all of that. But I think what I'm starting to learn, and the parts of the executive sort of roles that I've taken on are with staff development and like team management. So like really trying to create a supportive structure for our staff. And that's something we're thinking about a lot, is how we can just have better benefits, better pay, better just like working situations, recognizing that our team are humans, we're not just our jobs and just the work that we're doing day to day. So, and that when we come into our workspaces, we're still these full people. So trying to create an organizational culture where people feel safe and comfortable and are able to bring their full selves to the work.
So I'm drawn to the way that you're talking about what you're working towards. And I'm wondering how has that been influenced, right? Because that's not necessarily, even a moment ago when you were talking about the definition of a farmer, it seems like you have a lens that is perhaps very modern, or I don't know if it's new wave, but it is the type of business that I'm drawn to, which is thinking about more than just capitalism thinking about more than just maximizing outputs from inputs. And so I'm just wondering, it is hard to change a hierarchy-based organizational structure to a more flat organization. Who's inspired that? How are you thinking about it?
Gosh, I don't know if it's just one person. I feel like it's sort of like I'm getting these messages or notes from all parts of life. Like, I don't know, I think directly with Organic Grower School, previously our previous executive director, Lee Warren, she did a lot of work around team building and building trust. And I think that really helped us she set a really great foundation for us to be able to move to more of a lateral management structure. And I don't know if that would have been, so that has been a big influence on me, her mentorship. With her role, and she was the executive director, our first executive director, and was here, and I worked with her for 6.5 years. But, even listening to podcasts or reading books or things like that. And actually a lot of it is working with other colleagues who are doing this work across the country, supporting farmers and growers. I'm really big on collaboration. I recognize that me as an individual and us at Organic Grower School, as it's our vision to transform the food system, but we can by no means do that on our own. The food system is massive and has a lot of different parts. And so we're trying to, serve in our role with supporting people to grow themselves and to grow in a sustainable way and organic way that benefits the environment and the community and as well as the economy. So there's, oh gosh, I'm totally losing my train of thought.
You're doing great. So how about that makes me think of a new thing, which is.
Oh, sorry, I remembered where I was going.
Perfect. Go ahead.
That's okay. Okay, so the collaboration piece. We're involved in a lot of other different projects with other organizations, and I think a lot of it is coming from work we're doing around racial equity and social justice too, and just broadening my understanding of how work can be done, how people can relate with one another, what skills are valued, what things are valued in general, and rethinking what that really looks like, and getting beyond, white supremacy culture and the way that has influenced has been put blinders on me as a white person in this world, and how it's impacted my perspective. So working with other people from different walks of life and different experiences has helped me understand there's just so many other ways to see the world, So I think that's been a big influence too, of just like leaning into that and recognizing that just because we've been doing it a certain way doesn't mean that it's the right way or the best way. And so being open to that change.
Wow. How many teammates, team members, folks are involved in Organic Grower School?
So we have 7 people on staff right now. 3 of us are full-time and the rest are part-time. And we've had, I think, as many as 9 or 10. And when I first started here 9 years ago, there were only 3 of us and we were all part-time. Wow. So there's been a big transition and growth spurt in the last 9 years or so.
That's amazing. And you mentioned how you're collaborating with organizations that maybe look like organic grower schools from around the country. I'm wondering, the name is Organic Grower School. It's not WNC Organic Grower School. It's not Appalachian. It's not. It seems to speak to a national, global potential audience. Who is the audience that you're educating today?
Yeah, so the geography that we try to focus on is the Southern Appalachians. So the mountain counties in Western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, Northern Georgia, Eastern Tennessee, and Southwestern Virginia. But I would say we have had our biggest impact, and most of our work is happening in Western North Carolina because that's where we are physically.
Yeah. You had mentioned that there was learning today was happening remotely, and I just wasn't sure if that perhaps was always a part of the core education program. It doesn't seem
it had not been for a long, for most of our history, but that's been one of the perks of the pandemic, is we've been wanting to get more into online education, and it sort of forced our hand into it because we couldn't do education otherwise. And yeah, definitely a silver lining is that we've been able to, we've had folks attending from California, some of our workshops, or Florida, other parts of the Southeast. And, folks have said they wouldn't have been able to participate in some of our programs otherwise. So that's been a really nice bonus to an otherwise very challenging year.
Sure. Yeah. And
is that we have been able to expand.
And that's special. I'm wondering, when thinking about the curriculum, perhaps, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but some of the courses or programs that are happening today, what do they look like?
Yeah, well, all online is the main answer, but we've had to adapt each program differently, just based on who we're serving, what the original curriculum was for those. So, our Farm Beginnings program, that's a year-long training program that we offer for people who are really wanting to move from that sort of learner stage of farming. They might have worked on farms or, have started, raising animals on their property or growing some, but they really want to move to the next level of turning it into a business. So Farm Beginnings is meant to kind of help kickstart them in that process. And so we're really focusing on those business skills. And that has actually been one of the more successful to online transitions that we've had, and where we've had people be able to attend from outside. But, we've had to most of our programming had such a focus on in-person and really being able to have that community and cohort building in physical space with one another to move online. We were really trying to figure out how to recreate that connection in an online space. And that one, because it's the same group of people who are coming together, week after week and doing the work together, it's, I think, been a really fulfilling experience for a lot of people too. And then, our spring conference went totally online, and that, I think, was a harder one because it's, that's been our flagship program. That's how we started 28 years ago, and that's all we did for a long time. It was totally volunteer board who would come together, put on this spring conference, and have some, teachers to have workshops. And then it grew and grew. And so I think we had 100 people at our first conference, and then we've had as many as 1,800 people at our conference the last couple of years. So, and it's just like, it's in the spring. It's the, the second weekend in March every year. And I think everyone's just like, ready to shed winter and like get outside and like be with people and just like, bloom themselves. So it's just like a really enlivening experience in person. And so having to shift that online, I think, was a harder sell in some ways for people who have been coming to the conference for a long time, to not have that same sort of in-person experience. So there's some things that have worked really well, some things not as well as we'd hoped, but we've learned a lot in the process too.
Yeah. I can only imagine. And I guess now is as good a time as any to say that Sarah and I just bought a house a couple months ago now, and we are perhaps the type of person who would be in maybe the next season of our life would be a Farm Beginnings participant. I don't know if we're ever going to want to take this metaphorical show on the road and try and properly turn it into a business, but we have a a couple chickens, and we have a little third of an acre, and we have a couple raised beds now. And I have no idea what we're doing. I started a little orchard, but I watch YouTube, and and I bought a book, Jaya's Garden, maybe something like that, Jaia. But it came highly recommended from the internet. I don't know, but there's just so much. There's so much to learn, and it seems like the time scale on education is longer than anything I've ever participated in. Normally, there's a faster feedback loop, and so how long have you've been at Organic Grower School for 6 years or so? You mentioned with mentorship under the last executive director, but I'm like, have you always had a passion for growing and farming?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I would not. I would say that's not been the story for me. I guess my story is kind of typical to a lot of families. I'm one generation removed from the farm, and I think as time goes on, more and more people are finding themselves multiple generations removed from the farm. But there was a time where most of us were getting most of our food from the land where we lived, or at least very close to where we lived. And so I grew up in quote unquote the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, but my dad had grown up on a dairy farm. Wow. And but he was really encouraged by his parents to go to college. So he did that, became an accountant, just went from one type of workaholic type job as a dairy farmer working, 24/7 to an accountant job, which is very similar in a lot of ways as far as how much work is involved. And my mom was a teacher, an orchestra teacher in public schools. And in the year I was born, my grandparents sold their cows as a part of a dairy buyout that was happening at that point. And so I was sort of the youngest of all the grandkids, and missed out on the active farming part of family. But we've always had that farmland. It's still in our family outside of Greensboro. There's about 120 acres, and I still have family who lives there, but no one's actively farming it. They lease it out to neighbors who run cattle on it. So I grew up with that sort of mentality of like, well, as family farmers and, as a Farlow, like you can do whatever you can do anything because you're a Farlow, and we have farming in our background was sort of a narrative. But I wasn't super interested in it. For most of my childhood or growing up, like I loved going out to visit my grandparents, and would spend time there during the summers. But I didn't really experience the farming part. And then in college, I studied anthropology and geography. And that's where I really developed this, I guess, understanding that the environment is the great connector of all of us, like it's the way that we interact. I guess on just such a cellular level, and food is the most, is the closest way we interact with the environment. And it influences, so many aspects of who we are as individuals, as families, communities, countries, and as a planet. And so that's sort of what I started to see agriculture and sustainable agriculture as a way that I could have a positive impact in the world, and a tangible impact in the midst of all of these really big problems that, I was seeing and learning about in college, the great awakening that many of us have in liberal arts schools. So that's sort of what led me down that direction, is more towards sustainable farming and sustainable food systems too. And just seeing it as a way that I could actually make a difference in the world, and maybe, kind of start to solve in some small ways some of these bigger issues of, systemic racism and oppression and unequal access to resources and climate change and all of those pieces.
And that all happened in your undergraduate. You connected all of those dots. You saw the stars align with land and food being part of probably the best solution option that I can think of now. And I didn't learn this in college. I'm like recognizing it, in real time today, but you saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah. I don't know if I could have articulated it at the time, but,
Okay.
Looking back, that's what really sparked me in this direction. And then, and I didn't necessarily see myself in farming education at first. I was really interested in environmental education and working with kids, and did some work in that realm for a couple years after undergraduate. And then, or after I had gotten my bachelor's degree. And then at that point, I also had the chance to work on a farm and just got more involved in gardening myself, and started to see working with adults and supporting people to farm. I played with the idea of farming myself, knowing that my family had this land and all of that. But then, I also realized that I didn't have to farm to feel satisfied and feel like I could still, have a good impact on the world.
Sure.
I could support other people to do it.
I was just going to say, like, it's one thing, and I'm recognizing it's only been about a month with chickens, and I built the raised beds during our time with the chickens. So, I'm as novice and as early days as possible, but there is something, I'll call it romantic, about the idea of starting a farm or of growing things and eating the things that you grow. When the rubber hits the road, you talk about dairy farmers and accountants. There are no off days when you have, animals to take care of. And I don't know what it's like. Like, I don't know if I'm hurting the plants that we have so far. I don't know if they're thriving. Like, I'm constantly out there, and I'm just like, so all I'm attempting to point at is that recognizing that this thing is romantic or might be the solution, and then attempting to live into that recognition can be very, very different. Can be very different and very challenging. And so you notice that maybe I don't need to wear, overalls and be out, farming so much as there's a way to empower the change that I'm looking for through farming. And here's how I might approach that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you've really hit a nail on the head with the romance of farming. I feel like that's sort of like the back conversation or the side conversation we have about a lot of our farming education is we're doing a lot of bubble bursting. Like, you might have these really hot, lofty ideas and dreams about what farming really is, but there's a lot more to it that you may not fully understand. Sure. And so we want to make sure you're making this decision based on like your quality of life goals and your values and what your actual resources and skills are, and we'll help you get there if you want to. Sure. But you got to really want to. And
I think that's smart, because there's so I'll pause where I'm about to say it and say, when Sarah and I decided to move out of Brooklyn, New York, it was in part because we sat down one weekend and tried to like dream about a future. And we asked ourselves, where is it? And it wasn't in the West Village. It wasn't in like the cutest neighborhoods that you can think of in New York or Brooklyn. There was a yard, and, there was some land, and there was a community that we felt tied to. And in my version, I had this garden that I wanted to, have Sarah have a garden because she's an incredible cook. And I just always imagined it'd be so cute if she just runs out and grabs some parsley or whatever for a meal, tops it off. And how cool could that be? And so romantic ideal of a future had a garden in it. And then I also have a personal, calling towards eating the best versions of meat that I can find and wanting to be really close to that process, because I can agree with it being, not cool and not right at like a very high industrial level, but it feels okay and right at a very one-to-one backyard, hunting even level, at least for me. And so all that to say that there is a phenomenon which people call, like finding the zone, or which argues that if you're playing Tetris and it's absolutely raining down these Tetris pieces, and you're not world class at Tetris, that's not a fun game. That is not a fun thing. That is not fun to play. And if Tetris pieces are moving, as like you can't even notice them moving because they're coming down so slow, and you're getting a perfect score, that is also not a fun game. And so you need to find where it's challenging and has your attention and allows for this level of like release and total focus, but it's also still fun because you're not failing, right? Like you're not losing, you're not getting the sound. And so, we got these chickens given to us because someone that we know had too many chickens. They're getting 20 eggs or something a day. And so they had to get rid of some chickens, and we said, okay. And then I was like, do you want rabbits? Do you want this? And I was like, no, you know what? Like, I think that I'll probably fail. I think we'll hit that boundary on this is too hard. Too much is happening. Too much has happened too fast, to where we maybe not want to do it a year from now or want to continue. And so, the romance, at least in my world, is still alive. I'm a month into it, so I'd hope it was. But I'm also like intentionally trying to not try so hard and create like my attempt at I went with an orchard because I think it should be relatively hands off once they're in. Like if they make it a year, they're probably going to make it. Like I probably won't mess that up. And then these really resilient, like fast growing vegetables that make me feel like I'm winning, but really it's just like, you probably can't mess this up, has been my approach. And I don't even know what that means, but it seems like in the bubble bursting that you talk about, it seems like you're doing a service. It seems like that's a good thing because you might have less farmers if everyone rushes into it.
Yeah, well, and that's, I love that story that you're telling about starting. I feel like you're starting small, and I think that's like the main recommendation, we give to growers of any scale. And the bubble bursting, I would say, is more from like moving from some level of home grower to a farmer, because that's just a whole different trajectory, and it involves a whole lot more when you're really trying to support your livelihood with farming or with growing. So like, we try to help people figure out like where on the scale of growing you are, because you're somewhere on the scale. Yeah. But like, if you can find a way to keep that romance alive, like you said, with whatever scale you choose, like if that means it feels good to have a couple of, raised beds in your backyard, a couple of chickens, maybe a rabbit, maybe not, or, whatever that really looks like for you, figuring that out. And not, I think it can be really easy to try and do too much all at once, especially getting started.
Yeah.
So if you start small, learn, build your skills as you go, do something easy, then you build those muscles a little bit.
Sure. And I'm wondering, for someone in our, I'll call my level, right? So I don't have multiple seasons of home gardening, and I'm not necessarily ready to make a step into selling any products. Or do you have programs that are for, level 0.1 as maybe below 101?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I'd say our spring conference is always a really good spot for that. When it's in person, we have over 70 workshops. This year we had about 30 that were all recorded, and you can actually still access our spring conference if anyone's really interested in that. I think we have a few more months of access through the online platform we used. But we also have a gardening series, and that's really like Gardening 101. starting with the basics of like, this is soil. These are the parts of soil and how it works and how you can, and then this is a seed and this is how, that might be a little bit too basic, but
no, I think that's
gets into all of those basics for sure.
That is helpful. I'm wondering with okay, and are there other classes? So that's the spring conference. Are there, I guess, workshops coming up that are, how to do X or this done like Y? I don't know, new.
Yeah. So I'd say our gardening series. So yeah, we have our spring conference, and that's for growers of all levels, farmers, gardeners. But yeah, we have a gardening series that we do in partnership with Diana McCall, who is a really excellent community gardener in Black Mountain and just a really, great teacher. And that, I think we've done our spring and summer 2-part series, but there's a fall one coming up in July that people can still sign up for. And that we typically do the gardening series every year. We also have a lot of resources on our blog online. Like if it's not the right timing for a workshop or something, you can plug into that. And we do have a homegrown dreams, which is a newly coined name for it. We were calling it homestead dreams before, but as part of our sort of racial equity work, we've recognized that homestead can have a lot of trauma connected to it for Indigenous communities, especially with the Homestead Act and how it, basically like paved the way for white settlers to take over land across the country and disenfranchised folks of color, or they didn't have the same opportunities to get land at that point too. So we've renamed it Homegrown Dreams as a part of that process for us. But it's really meant to help people get started and figure out like what the best pathway is for them to get started with growing, especially on a home scale. And that, I think we have a workshop coming up in July. That's a 1-day thing.
Exciting. You might see this smiling face in one of those classes virtually or in person.
Great.
You're
so welcome.
Thank you. There seems like there is, we were talking about this before the episode started, but it seems like with each even new word that you learn, there are then 100 or dozens of things to learn about that word. And I am doing my best to not feel completely inadequate and inept and like, I'm at the office now and I'm like, I just hope the chickens are alive when I get home. Like I hope that something hasn't radically happened and like is something landed and eats all of our herb garden. I imagine that could happen. I don't know, but it gives me like, and so some sort of catastrophic failure that is outside of my control is frightening. And then it's just also that I'm doing something actually wrong and I'm trying to not let that voice take much more control than is needed. But I look forward to learning a lot more. And I will be in some of your classes. I'm wondering when thinking about the scale version though, if someone's going to start the business, because I'm kind of fascinated by business. It's one of my reason why we interview primarily entrepreneur types. What are some of like the oh wow moments that students will have when attempting to introduce scale? And I ask this in part because I watch now a lot of movies and documentaries about farming. The biggest little farm is like a really popular, famous one. Did you see that? California. I
haven't yet.
Okay. Well, it's beautiful.
I've heard about it.
Perfect storm in a lot of ways. The husband, one of the main characters, like literally was a documentary nature photographer, videographer. And so like, it's the most beautiful, you couldn't have, no other farm could have pulled off this version of the story. But you watch that and all of a sudden you're like, I need to buy 200 acres and get started. And I don't imagine that it works the way that it worked for them, for everyone. And so I'm wondering, what are some of those aha moments or the biggest lesson blocks that you'll try and provide for folks who are trying to start a actual production farm and feed families and grow a business?
Good question. I'm trying to figure out where to start. Well, I guess, we try and help people understand what some of the biggest barriers are to farming in our current modern world. And, what we've learned through our own research, as well as, research and work that's been going on across the country, and just talking with the farmers that we work with in our network, is that land access is a primary barrier, as well as capital to get started. There's a lot. It's a pretty intensive upfront capital business, and land is a big part of that. And then also some of those, production and business skills that you need to, it's very different from growing lettuce in your, a couple of beds in your backyard to growing it at a production scale, and then being able to market that and finding your markets and understanding, what the buyers need or who you're selling to and what their needs are. And there's just a lot more steps to it when you're moving it to the business scale. And definitely ask more questions if I'm not quite answering your question.
When thinking about the capital, because that's one of the first things I think of, my inclination is always to go to some sort of a service business, because you don't necessarily need capital to start a service business. Maybe some software, but you're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of software. Typically, you're talking about, monthly subscriptions of $19.99, and you're off in your race and you got a business. Buying land, buying, heavy machinery, buying feed, buying fences, putting fences in, all of these things are by orders of magnitude seemingly more complex than, updating a website. And so how does the average person who might have made very little money so far growing get a loan? Is there a special loan for if you're going to try and turn a plot of land into a farm? I imagine there's got to be some sort of incentives to support farmers, but I don't know anything about that space.
Yeah, there's definitely some out there. I would say it's still really difficult for a lot of people. I know a lot of traditional banks don't necessarily see farming as a viable career, and so they won't. It can be really hard to go to a traditional bank and get a loan to start a farm. So, but there are some specialized ones through the USDA and the Farm Service Agency, particularly for buying land for small and beginning farmers, or not necessarily small, any small and large farmers. There's some micro loans available through them as well. But there's the USDA also has a long history of systemic racism and how they've given out their resources. So it can be a real challenge if you're a person of color trying to access those. And it depends on, and you have local people who are making those decisions. So if you don't feel safe going into the office, that's a barrier. Whatever, all the barriers that are there for beginning farmers in general are definitely magnified if you're Black, Indigenous, or person of color trying to farm as well. And I think, it's definitely harder because most people aren't coming from farming backgrounds anymore. They don't have land that their family was on. They don't have equipment or anything like that. And the transfer of knowledge process has been broken too between the generations. So they don't have the farming know-how. So most people are trying to start a farm, especially young people today, they're just starting from, ground zero.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
With the ground piece.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some loans out there. I think that's why a lot of folks are buying smaller pieces of land and starting more like market gardens that are smaller scale, because they can't get access to larger pieces, especially in, Western North Carolina. There's beginning farmers are competing for land prices with second homeowners and developers who can pay a lot more than you can if you're planning to just farm on it.
Sure.
So there's, those kind of pieces to making it harder for farmers. But the USDA does have some programs available, and there's a lot more happening, I would say, with local creditors or, cooperative and community funding as well to support some of that, but it can be, difficult in so many ways.
Sure. And I'm wondering, you mentioned how like traditional loans are a little bit harder to come by, and knowledge has been passed down in a certain way. I'm wondering also if there's this other variable where, like, the type of farming that I'll say farming, but the type of growing that I'm interested in seems to be the type of growing that you're talking about, which is the term that shows up for me is like permaculture, which is like everything in effect working together, and you're trying to create a landscape that is sustainable, where if theoretically once you get it going, it could thrive on its own and like continue in that direction. Whereas if you plow a field and grow a certain crop or another, like it doesn't seem like if you stopped, it would continue to do that thing because that's the natural way. Like corn doesn't just grow in rows on its own, but you could create a farm environment that is natural, that, mammals or all sorts of like animals will come to, because wow, this is everything's so close and convenient for me. This is wonderful. And what I'm pointing to is that isn't farming as most banks might know it, I imagine. And that's not farming as maybe the USDA has decided farming is today. And that's not even the farming that if your father farms right now, I don't think that's the farming, or, mother or aunt. If they're working on a air quotes, a modern farm or a traditional farm, a commercial farm, it's probably not the type of farming that I would want to learn. I'd want this like other thing that is kind of like hippie and I think has the potential to save the world. And so that might just make things even complex as well. Because how do you explain, well, no, we're not just selling apples. We're not just an orchard,
right.
An apple orchard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. And something that I think a lot of the farmers we work with come up against, because it's not a traditional business model. It's, people who are used to making these loans see that and their eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
They're like, I can't make head nor tail of this to like decide if this seems viable, and so I'm just gonna say no to it. And I think it's really interesting and telling to be able to get some of these USDA like Farm Service loans. You have to have been turned down 3 times by other lenders to access them. So the fact that like that it's weird that it's a requirement, but the fact that that's a common story for people, that they're just getting turned down and turned down and turned down, and then this is the lender of last resort that you have to go to as the government. That's I think a really telling piece too.
Yeah, it's strange to me. I wonder, like a tale of mistaken incentives. Like I don't know, imagine people are just like, sandbagging these applications to banks to get. But I don't know if that's a weird incentive. That's a weird rule. Yeah, and my mind is racing. Like, could I start a farmer bank where like we raise a ton of money and then give it around to people who want to start some sort of do you use permaculture in your language? What is because organic is what shows up, right? But organic, is, to me at least, it's an asterisk. It's not the same necessarily as permaculture and organic. So what words show up for you when you think about farming and this type of not necessarily line crop farming or production?
Yeah, I'd say all the buzzwords are ones that we definitely use. Because for us, organic we kind of say it's organic with a little O, not the big O. So we're not
Great.
necessarily tied to organic certification and those kind of rules and classifications.
And
a lot of the farmers. Oh, yeah.
I just want to, I think that's a great point. It came up in one episode a long time ago now. Capital O organic, if I'm not mistaken, typically has a pretty expensive application process or pretty expensive certification process. So we might be buying at a farmer's market from someone who grows organically, but they're not able to put a capital O certified stamp on it because it costs a lot of money to do that. Am I directionally right?
Yeah. It's definitely costly and just time consuming, all the paperwork and pieces that go into it. And there's a time piece. It has to be 3 years of organic production. So before it can be certified, so that time lag can be hard for people too. But a lot of the people we work with, they're selling directly to their customers, and they've found that that added cost and all those extra pieces just aren't necessary because they can actually talk to their customers and tell them, this is what I'm doing. You can see my land, come out to my land, and have more of that relational trust rather than needing a label to communicate that to people. But, we're not against organic certification either, sure. But we just recognize that it's not for everybody and that you can still have really high quality, nutrient dense, regenerative, resilient food without that kind of a label. So, we also work with certified naturally grown. That's more of like what organic certification used to be before it got taken over by the USDA, where it's more of like a peer-to-peer certification process. There's I'm trying to think. There's lots of other really cool certifications out there that you can get that aren't as time consuming, but still kind of communicate to people what values you stand for as far as how you're growing your food and how you're contributing to the community too. So we help people connect to whatever best suits them for where they are in their farm business and what their goals are. Lots of people we work with, are using regenerative agricultural methods, resilient agricultural. There's, I feel like people are always trying to come up with the new thing to better define what they're doing. But, it's how I think it's really taking an approach where you're taking the environment and all of the ways that you interact with it and your community into account and trying to leave it better for future generations, I think is kind of the simple way of putting it.
I hear that, and I've seen regenerative show up a lot. To your point, that the newest term for me, which I know isn't necessarily a new term, but I'm like, it is my current favorite because it paints when you answered what is Organic Grower School, you mentioned a mission statement. To me, this is like a vision statement, but food forest. Like, I love the idea of a food forest, which is not something I've ever thought of. Those words have never shown up next to each other before in my world until recently. And so I have these little 6, one day maybe fruit bearing trees that are starting. And the thought that, at one point we might have a kid in the yard who can just like run out, eat a fruit, pick some, vegetables off a vine, pick up the eggs from the chickens, and then run back inside. Like it's like a fantasy. It's not even, doesn't sound like that's something that's real, based on my lived experience so far. But it was just, a day's worth of digging and a YouTube video on how best to plant replant a tree. Wild. I don't know. Here's hoping.
Yeah, and it's totally possible. Yeah, there's nothing, that's totally doable.
Right? And that's I think the gift and the curse of living in a Instagram, YouTube world is how perfect a lot of things look when you watch the produced version of it. And I think that even if it's not perfect, it's worth moving in that direction. So I think that that's partly the mission that you've communicated, which is it doesn't need to be perfect, but let's all move in this general direction. And I love it. And I'm wondering, when thinking about the future, the years, I mean, maybe the second half of this year and the years ahead for Organic Grower School, what kind of initiatives? I imagine it's, keep on keeping on, but what else is on your mind for the future?
Yeah. I mean, let's see. We're always trying to sort of like figure out how we can, improve on what we're currently doing, of course. And if that means, shifting, getting rid of some programs eventually, like that's something, or like expanding other programs. Those are always sort of conversations we're having as a nonprofit too, because, our role as a nonprofit is to serve the community. And, so we want to make sure that the services we're providing are really relevant and useful and practical for people. So we're actually kind of in the midst of trying to do some strategic planning of like who Organic Grower School is going to be in the next 20 years. Is there a role for us, and what role is that? I feel like I don't know quite how to answer that question yet, because we're like just in the beginning stages of that work.
Sure.
But, and there's always that conversation too of like, the goal is to eventually work ourselves out of a job where it's not, people are growing, people have access to healthy food and the food that they want and they need, and can grow it themselves or find it nearby, and have the skills and the knowledge. And there's pathways for that to be, transferred to the next generation, and people can have sustainable, viable livelihoods as a farmer. And we have clean air and water and, all of those things, and we won't be needed anymore,
Sure.
like that's the long-term goal, really. But yeah, I feel like the path for us and a niche that we've been finding is with that beginner grower, especially. So I see us kind of expanding and refining our work there for the next few years. We, are thinking about if doing more national work is something that is exciting for us and viable for us, or if we really want to like get more local. It's sort of like there's so many visions. It can be hard to decide what the best path forward really is. But yeah, I think we just want to continue to support people growing in whatever ways they're useful for people. And I think with the pandemic, I am saying that there is still a role for in-person programming. Like, I think that's sort of been one of our conversations before COVID of well, there's all this stuff on YouTube, and people, can just go and learn things for free, and or they don't, there's also this, I think, understanding that you don't have to do any training or have education to be a farmer. That it's one of those things that's like, well, my great granddaddy did it and he didn't have an education, sort of thing, but like he was educated in a different way, and farmers, as a career, it's a profession just like any other. So like you need training if you're a nurse or a plumber, and farmers need some level of training too. So trying to help create that pathway, I think is still there's still a place for us there. And doing that, I guess, what I was trying to say with the in-person piece is that there's still a real value for that may not be filled just by people going to watching YouTube videos or things like that too. So figuring out how we can communicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I'm hearing you. What I'm hearing is that there's so much potential for work to be done, and the community to serve is in my opinion, I mean, I now exist in your community, like your target demographic. And a couple of years ago, I wasn't, right? And so I imagine there will only be more new, green, to call it, customer types or, folks to serve. And with that, even if it's just 101s, if all you do, if the mission is just like, we're going to do 101 level teaching on all of these things, there will always be new people to teach it to. And so there are three books technically that have shown up in my brain while you've spoken. And, I want to call them out because they're been influential to me. There's a woman named Frances Hesselbein, who was the former CEO of the Girl Scouts of America. She was their CEO through, the creation of the logo that we think of today of Girl Scouts, which has a lot of face profiles. And there's this gentleman named Peter F. Drucker, which is a big deal in most like management philosophy. They call him the father of modern management theory. Anyway, he said that she was the best leader that America had. It was probably in the 80s when that was said. She has always championed flat organizational structures. And so I thought maybe somehow or another you had like heard of Frances, or like maybe we're like connected to her in some way.
Yeah. So, I feel like I should be because I was a Girl Scout.
There you go, right? So
award and everything.
Yeah,
so I should know.
So Frances Hesselbein, Girl Scouts of America's CEO. She is American treasure. She's got Medal of Freedom. She is this itty bitty little old sweetheart angel woman that I've over the years gotten to know in some small ways. But so is that. And so she wrote, so she pushes this flat organizational structure, which I thought might have been something you'd heard of and then, or seen or something. But in their community is Peter Drucker's 5 questions. And she wrote a like modern, like an updated version of it a couple of years ago. She had a bunch of, I'll call them celebrity leaders, like kind of like participate in repenning some of these like 5 questions for a business, which I think could be really powerful as you do this 20-year vision. And then in their circle is Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and a bunch of other business books. He's much younger than Peter Drucker and who's now deceased, and Frances Hesselbein, but he did a Good to Great for nonprofit organizations. It's like a 30-page reader. And all of them kind of point to is like, who's the customer? What do they care about? How do we serve them? How do we know if we're serving them? How do we start over? Like, and I think those might be the 5 questions or something very close to those. It all points to the same kind of work to be done, which is, like a garden and like a farm, constant. It starts every year. It starts every season. Starts every day. You just gotta do the work, and it's a beautiful thing. And so those are for the audience, and potentially I will have links to them. But they are really just all great books and great resources, generally.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I definitely want to look into to Frances Hesselbein. You said is her last name.
Yeah.
That would be. I took notes on those too.
Sure. She, a national treasure. I was lucky enough, I fell backwards into it, when I was in college. She started a college student leadership summit that happened in the summers. And I, volunteered there after going to the first year or so. She's a huge, influence on me, and flat organizational structure was like, I don't think people thought of that in the 80s, and the idea of giving ownership and leadership laterally, crazy, revolutionary perhaps at the time, and now it's a lot more common, hard to practice to live into often, but definitely directionally where I like the idea of everyone collaborating and owning the responsibilities and owning the mission. And so leading with mission communication, I thought maybe we were more aligned than we could have ever imagined.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's, I mean, we've been in this shift to more or less lateral management for the last year. And yeah, I feel like there's so much to learn, and there's definitely good examples out there, but yeah, it's not a new thing either.
No.
So yeah. I'm glad to have that resource. And I have a long list of things that I want to read, but I'll move that to the top of the list, I think.
Probably start with,
I think it's very prescient
exactly
for where we are.
Yes, yeah. Just start with some blog posts. I think that the 5 Questions book is one of the Peter Drucker one, which was the original one. I think that might be 100 pages, like size 16 font. I don't know why. Like, it's the weirdest, but it could be a master's degree. Like, if you can ask these 5 questions and do the work to really sit in it and then execute against what is uncovered, it's almost, it's like magnetism towards growth and success and serving the community that you say that you care about. It's eventual, it's just a matter of time. All that to say, so exciting. I can't wait to participate and see how you grow and evolve. And to be 28 years into an organization, that would put you at probably one of the oldest businesses that we've talked to in our almost 100 conversations at this point, or organizations at the very least. And I feel like it's so exciting that at 28 years, this has got to feel like day one, like it's got to feel like there's so much potential, and it's not business as usual or whatever. Like, I think that the tide is shifting in a very big way, which is got to be exciting in your seat.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, one reason why I've been with Organic Grower School for so long is, yeah, we've been around for 28 years, but yeah, we're like little toddlers at the same time, still just figuring out how the world works in some ways. And we've built so much over the last, 9 years since I've been here. When I started, there were 3 of us. We were all part-time. We didn't have an executive director. And then when our board decided to take a negative budget, like they took the leap and approved a negative budget, and that's when we brought on our first full-time executive director with Lee. And then, and when I started, it was part-time and temporary. I was only hired for like the summer to run our craft farm network. And that was the only program we were really doing outside of our spring conference at the time. And then the person, and I was hired because the person who'd been running it was farming and wanted to be able to focus on her farm in the summer, and then did come in the winter, but then she decided to farm. So I kind of got to stay on as the coordinator. And I was back on this, just my path, because it's traditional, like from the side of like started as the associate, then became the coordinator, then became a director, and now I'm the executive director. But when I started, like there were no rungs to that ladder, like we were basically like putting the ladder together as we went.
Sure.
And then now I'm in the executive director position. And when I came into it, though, we took apart the whole
ladder,
like,
no ladder.
Traditional model. Yeah, again. Decided like we didn't want to hire an outside person to come in what had originally been the executive director role. We wanted to take that apart and try and fill those functions with staff we already had. And before we started that process, I was not interested in being the executive director. Like at least where I am in my life right now, like I didn't want to be holding the entire organization and, all on my shoulders. Like I had, I have a 2.5-year-old at home, and I have a 7-month-old. So like
Oh my
I
goodness.
was pregnant and, in the middle of a pandemic and just like, what, like, is this what I want? But then when we recreated it in a way where that responsibility and that power and decision making was shared and not totally on me, that felt so much more approachable.
Sure.
And more of a fit for like my values and where I am in my life right now. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's been definitely a different path, but like a typical path in some ways.
I love that we got that insight into a little bit more into how that evolution has kind of transpired, and I'm feeling like there was something, it came up earlier that I could have asked a question on. I would love to now, which could point to the future as well for the organization. But you talked about how much you've endeavored to learn about perhaps inclusion and equity, and I'm just wondering what has come up in that process for you, and how do you see your organization growing with this new knowledge and showing up perhaps differently in some ways? I don't know.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a journey for us at Organic Grower School. I think we, really started intentionally with racial equity and social justice 5-6 years ago. And most of the work, it has been internal and still is. I think that's, as a traditionally white-led organization serving majority white participants, that's where a lot of our work needs to be happening. And it's sort of like we've just had a lot of our own work to do, acknowledging harm that we've caused in the past, in our 28-year history by not centering racial equity. We have had, it wasn't intentional, but like our impact has caused harm because we weren't centering it and weren't intentional about really focusing on social justice and racial equity work. So like acknowledging that history,
Sure.
Making amends in the community as best we can, educating ourselves, and then slowly starting to do more of that work externally. So like educating, white participants about how all of our agricultural system is based on a history of oppression and systemic racism from the very beginning. And that's a whole other podcast of
Sure.
the history of, slavery and how it ties into our modern agriculture system, or is our modern agriculture system in a lot of ways. So, I think starting to acknowledge that and just speak about it and be honest about it, as well as trying to bring in more folks of color as teachers and creating more of a space where people of color feel like this is a place for them, I think has been a major focus of ours too. Bringing folks of color on staff and on our board, and just getting, there's so many, it's happening in a lot of fronts because we don't, I want racial equity to be, and I was just hearing this articulated in another webinar I was participating in, but we want that to be sort of like the fertilizer in our soil, not just the lens that we're looking through that we can take off and put on again, but like really be what's feeding us, and what is like where we're rooted, and is integrated in all parts of what we're doing. And how we function as a staff or organization, all of our policies, but then also what our presence is in the world and how we're talking about food and farming and who has access and who doesn't. So really trying to just continue to move towards that in small ways. It's sort of like it's a 1 step forward, 2 step back kind of process all the time. And the horizon is never, you never really get closer to the horizon, but nevertheless, like still trying to get there, I think is where we're at and hope to be. Yeah.
It seems to me
future.
that is, there's a thread that ties this whole conversation together, which is, there's always work to be done, but nevertheless, let's do the work.
Let's do the work.
Yeah. And I am glad that you mentioned the, I guess the renaming of the program to Homegrown, because that was news to me. I learned that off podcast with a previous guest who, something we were talking something homestead, but really like I try not to use that word anymore. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know what we're talking about. So what a great opportunity to educate, and I hope that our listeners here have learned as much as I have today and are eager to do the work to learn more. I think that from where I'm standing, I don't know of another type of work or initiative that, to your point, what you learned in college has the potential to make as much meaningful change on a, at a family level and then at a global level as doing the work to make dirt better, to make soil, like this little thing that is forgotten by, I'll say, most people. Like if you can make dirt better, you can make the world better. It's wild.
Yeah, that's so true.
Wild. So with that, I'm as a person, you have a 7-month-old. You said a 2-year-old. What's happening when you're not in this executive director chair, wearing all the hats?
Yeah, I'm hanging out with them mostly. So yeah, Finn, he'll be 3 in July, and then Willa is, she just turned 7 months old. It's they're beautiful little kids, and they're a lot in so many ways, like so many great fun, like just beautiful heart melting moments, and then just like a lot of big feelings too with a toddler around. So there's managing both sides of that. But yeah, so I guess that's sort of like what my life revolves around these days is
imagine this
family
like
and and work. But I should mention too, my partner, my husband, we've kind of gotten the best of both worlds as far as farming. I think he's the farm manager with Hickory Nut Gap, which is a local grass-fed meat operation.
What's his name?
Walker Sides.
Walker Sides. Okay. I've met a couple of folks on the team there, but I don't know if I've met Walker. Awesome. Yeah. They're up to some good work over at Hickory Nut Gap.
Yeah, they are. And he's been there, I don't know, 12 years or so now, and actually grew up there in Fairview, and that's where we live now. So we get like the farming lifestyle, and he gets to farm every day, but we don't have to make the land payments, and he still gets a salary and vacation, and I get to support farmers. So like in a lot of ways, I feel like we found the sweet spot as far as our careers in supporting the food system. So we still get a lot of the perks of the farming without as much. There's definitely still headaches involved, and if it's the animals are dying or the cows are in the middle of the road and get 2 a.m. phone calls, and he has to run out and herd them back in. But
are you out east then? Are you in that kind of Fairview area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're right by the farm.
Beautiful.
Our landlords are actually members of the family, so we're pretty networked in there for sure.
That's wonderful. With that, I'll ask a question that shows up in, I believe, all the podcasts, or at least most of them, which is word association. We have the word Asheville, and then we have the word community. What comes to you when I give you the Venn diagram of Asheville and community?
Well, that was hard because you say Asheville and I think community, so that's where my head is stuck right
so
now.
The circles are overlapped.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yeah, it's just one big circle. This is a hard one for some reason.
And this is not.
I guess maybe
okay.
I want to say just growing. Like, I know that might sound very cliched just based on my work, but I just feel like there's so much growth to be done and so much growth that's happening in Asheville and Western North Carolina. For better or for worse, sometimes we're growing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll give you, that was a very on-brand answer, and I think it's a very good answer. There's growth in Asheville, but I think that you don't need to be Sherlock to notice that you are pointing towards a type of growth that is the good, thoughtful, net benefit to all the people who are participating in the growing pains that come with growth.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. What an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to put my hands in some dirt at one of the courses and learn how to, I don't know, do anything, because I don't know how to do anything right now. And I would love to learn through one of your programs. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. Hopefully we'll see you at one of them sometime soon.
Perfect. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was.